This is GB News Originals with me, Bev Turner. I'm here in Washington. I'm delighted to have this conversation today with Alexander Iosad from the Tony Blair Institute, because Alexander, I think digital ID is the biggest issue of the day. I truly believe that. I think this has the fundamental capacity and power to change all of our lives. I will put my cards on the table and say I have grave reservations about digital ID. I want you to tell me why I'm wrong today, Alex. So just go first. What is digital ID for people who are watching this who maybe don't understand what it is? Just give us a broad outline, if you would.
Thanks, Bevan. Really a pleasure to be here. I think this is a really good question to start with, because so much of this debate is dominated by assumptions, sometimes misconceptions. And where we do have reservations, we should treat them very, very seriously, because this is an important issue, as you've said. So what is a digital ID? It is, put simply, a system that allows you to do three things. It allows you to prove that you are who you say you are, in the way that today you might use a passport or a driving license, but it allows you to do that much more quickly and much more conveniently and accurately. In a way, for example, that passports can be forged, digital ID is much, much harder to exploit in that way. It allows you to prove certain things about yourself. It might be your age, it might be your address, it might be your right to work status in the UK context. And what that means is that at the moment, to do that, you have to dig out your bills, you have to show your documents, which have lots of other information that the person you're showing your documents to actually has no reason to know. So let me give you one example here. If you're in a bar, if you're showing someone your driving license to show that you are of age to buy alcohol, if you're a young, vulnerable woman, you're actually sharing your home address with a person who has absolutely no business knowing this. With a digital ID, the only thing that you would do is show them a quick tick. You're over 18, they don't know your age, they don't know your date of birth. This is how it's been built around the world. That is much more private and much more secure. And finally, I think this is where things do change the way that we interact with each other and with the state for the better, in my view. I'm sure we'll have a debate about this. It allows you to access services on the basis of who you are and things that are true about you. And often these are things that government already knows. But today it asks you to fill out endless forms again and again, the same information that they already have. We spend up to 1.5 weeks a year in this country filling out forms and waiting for a reply. With a digital ID, you can be pre-approved for services. You can be asked, do you want this? Do you not want this? You can say yes, and you can have the service be provided to you right there and then.
Is that genuinely a problem, people, the speed of proving who they are? Because the idea that we're sort of, spending hours looking through utility bills to try and justify to maybe a mortgage application company or the bank that you're who you are, that's very simple these days. You just take a photograph with your phone and you just email them that utility bill. So is that genuinely a problem, the speed with which you have to verify your identity?
It is a problem in several ways. It is speed, it's also privacy and security. So for example, this question of how long does it take you to find that bill? That's one question. I recently had to fill out a child benefit form. It took me 45 minutes to find all of the documents, and the government already knows all of this information. Let's say I take a photo, I found it in 5 minutes. Great, I'm better at this. I send it off. I'm sending off a photo of my energy bill to someone who has, again, no reason knowing how much I pay for energy. There's absolutely no security involved in this process. And what we've seen with digital ID systems built around the world is you create a system where you only share the information that the person on the other end of the line needs to know. And you do it securely. You do it not by sending a random email to a random address or uploading your passport photo to a landlord's website, which is creaking at the seams. You're doing this in a way that is verified. You're doing it in a way that's secure. You're doing it in a way that is private.
The privacy element of that, I don't see it as a problem. So I don't see how big a problem that is, that the bank can see that my EDF energy bill is 100 quid a month. How is that a problem, people? What problem is it actually causing for the individual who's handing over their utility bill to prove who they are?
Well, I think we all want our privacy to be protected. And when we share information with others, we are increasing the risk that someone might access it. And if it's done in this ad hoc manner, we don't know who we're sharing this information with. We don't necessarily know why. Now, it's not always going to be a problem that someone knows something, but if you ask me, I think a system where the only thing you are sharing is an answer to a question. Does this person live at the address that they say they live at? Are they over 18? Those are the things they need to know. They don't need to know more information than that. That's what Digital ID can provide us with.
The second one that you said was about if you show your driving license, for instance, in a bar as a young woman, you flash that to a barman, they might know your home address. How many instances have there been of young girls being followed home by barmen because they've flashed their driving license in a room and that barman has had the mental acuity to clock that address? I mean, I can do that. You should probably buy MI5 because that's quite a skill to be able to do that. How problematic is that, Alex?
I don't have a number for you of the number of instances where this would happen, but if we think about safety as an important issue, I think, again, we all know that we don't want something to be shared with people who don't need to know this information. And Digital ID can be a much more private way of doing this, whether this is with individuals in a scenario that I outlined, or whether that is with government. I know that there are people who have serious and legitimate concerns about how much information we might share with government in different contexts. I think Digital ID is a mechanism that allows you to exercise much more control over that process than the current way of doing things.
The last point you made is about accessing services. Can you just flesh that out a little bit? Because I don't think there's been a service that I personally have had to access that I haven't been able to do so because I didn't have a digital ID.
You can do it. It's not about not being able to access it. It is about being able to do it in a much more convenient and a much more secure manner. So let me give you one example, which is child benefit. This is something that they do today in Austria as well as other countries, where at the moment, once you have a child and you are sleep deprived, you've got a crying baby, you've got lots of things going on in your life. And if you want to receive child benefit, you need to go online. At least it's online now. It's not a paper form. That's progress. And you have to fill out this, a fairly lengthy form. You have to dig out all sorts of different documents, your national insurance number. You have to look for information about the little number printed at the bottom of the birth certificate. It's really quite involved. And then you wait. And they tell you, well, we're hoping to get back to you within 28 days. But who knows, it might take us longer. And that's at the time when you're already vulnerable. That's at a time when you are already dealing with a lot. In countries that have functional digital ID systems, what happens is something much simpler. You have a birth, it's registered at the hospital, just as it is today. A birth certificate is issued, just as it is today. And we know that there is a child, and the child has parents, and these parents are eligible for child benefit. If we have thresholds in a country around what is the level of income at which you receive child benefit, you can, in a secure and the model that I described to you, where you're not looking at anyone's number, how much money do they earn, just a quick yes or no, above or below the threshold, quick check, they're below the threshold, we know who they are, we know that they've had a child, we can send them a message to say, you are eligible for child benefit, would you like to have it, yes or no? You say yes, you receive the payment the next day.
But that streamlining of a system doesn't require a digital ID. That could be improved in the UK because that's fundamentally what we're talking about here, is what this means for Great Britain. If we wanted to streamline or make it more efficient for people to claim child benefit, and that is another debate for itself, whether it should be easier for people to claim child benefit, that does not require a digital ID, because what you're also then going to do is get that baby hooked up to a digital ID system and become part of the grand data set. So the idea that we need digital ID to access a basic service like child benefit feels a little bit disingenuous when, again, people who want child benefit and who are eligible for it, as far as we know, are there statistics on those that aren't able to access it because it's just too complicated?
We know that there are people who wait a very long time to apply for child benefit for all sorts of different reasons. We know that there are lots of benefits that go unclaimed. Another example of this is the winter fuel payment and the pension credit. The situation we had last year where a lot of people suddenly discovered that they were eligible for pension credit, but they never applied for it because they didn't know that they were eligible for pension credit. The only way that they found out was when winter fuel payments were tied to pension credit specifically. And that's not a good system. That means that we have made as a society a decision that someone is eligible for something. We want to support vulnerable pensioners. And we haven't done a good enough job of letting them know that they are eligible for this type of support. Now, digital ID is necessary to this. Sorry, just to answer your original question, digital ID is necessary to this because that is the way in which you're able to connect the system so that one part of government knowing something and another part of government knowing something allows them to work together, not be in silos, not all do their own thing, who knows how well, but to actually work together to provide that better service.
It was obvious to anybody that was paying attention from 2021 when vaccine passports were introduced that this was a trial for what we're now talking about today, Alex. Is that true?
No, I disagree. I think when we had vaccine passports, this was a once-in-a-generation emergency where we had to make decisions, and there is different research on what impact those decisions had. But that is not about digital ID. That was about dealing with a global pandemic. Let me give you an example. So Sweden is known as a country that had less strict regulations around COVID. It's a country that did not introduce compulsory vaccine passports. And it's a country that has a digital ID and that had a digital ID at the time. So there is no connection between digital ID and vaccine passports.
But is it a coincidence that it was Tony Blair, your boss, who was on television saying we needed to have vaccine passports so that we could see who had had a vaccine and who hadn't? And he is now the man who is pushing through digital ID. That is not a coincidence.
I can't comment on whether something is a coincidence or not, but what I can say is that we have been advocating for digital ID because that is best global practice, because lots of countries have had digital IDs since 2000. Some countries have had them for 20, 25 years, way before COVID, way before everything else. And we know from their experience, from our own research as an independent think tank, that these systems have improved the delivery of public services. They've actually raised people's trust in government. They have improved transparency. They have improved security. So we have been advocating for digital ID since 2017, 2018, not because of anything that you've just described, but simply because that is a way to make government better.
But the countries that we are most closely aligned to ideologically, America, where I am here, no digital ID. Australia, no digital ID. New Zealand, no digital ID. So which countries do you think the UK has an affinity with politically, value-wise, morality, in terms of morality and our value system, that has a digital ID that works well?
You've described two of them already. Australia is a country that is introducing digital ID at the moment. It's being rolled out. It's active in a few of their federal states. It's being rolled out at the national level. And they have not had the same level of, this controversy around it, because they understand that it can help them improve their public services. They understand that it can help them improve how citizens interact with government. New Zealand are introducing their own version of digital ID. In Canada, some states are introducing digital ID. And even in the US, there are states that have versions of digital ID. It's not active at the federal level. And, it is in those ways a very different country from the UK. But there are states, red states and blue states, that have digital IDs, and you can have your Apple Wallet on your phone, and you can have your, for example, driving license right there in that wallet.
The conversations that I've had here, though, in and around the White House about digital ID, there is an absolute unequivocal pushback that this sort of imposition of civil liberties and the bigger government working, a large government controlling the population, is something that President Trump would never consider, because it fundamentally goes against his belief in the relationship between the state and the individual and the extent to which the government should be able to control, because that's what this is, Alex. It all sounds incredibly benevolent and altruistic, and wouldn't it be lovely, and you'd save time in your day. But it fundamentally alters the relationship between the individual and the government in a way that is clearly not being accepted by the British public. You do accept that, surely, as a risk that is not positive?
So what I accept is a risk that we do not design a system that addresses the concerns that people have. And those are concerns that need to be heard. And, the government is going to go through a consultation process. The government, I think, has come to a view that this needs to be had as a real public debate, and that is a positive. It's why I'm not on behalf of government whatsoever, but I'm here with you debating these really important issues, as you've said at the start. This is the debate that we need to have as a country about what are the solutions, what are the ways of doing this that put the citizen in control, not the state. Because what I've described to you, what you've described as benevolent, what I've described to you is a system that is a state that is far less present in my life as a citizen. I'm not the one going to them, asking them for things. I'm not trying to figure out what can the state do for me. The state is absent unless something happens in my life where it can step in and be helpful, and then it steps away again. And we can exercise control over where our data goes through digital ID much better than we can today.
But when you say the state is absent from your life, it's literally going to be on the phone in your pocket. The potential for tracking, surveilling, predicting human behavior, judging personal choices, that is the door that this opens to everybody. And I don't trust the government to have my best interests at heart, particularly not the Tony Blair Institute, particularly since 2020. When Tony Blair said, we need to know who's had thing. That's
the Tony Blair Institute is not
terrifying.
the Tony Blair Institute is not the government. So I think those are two very, very different things. The Tony Blair Institute is not the government.
But the Tony Blair Institute is
We carry
advising.
out our own research.
But Tony Blair is incredibly closely connected to Keir Starmer and the Labour government and is advising the Labour government on this. You are here as a spokesperson for the Tony Blair Institute for something
of the Tony Blair Institute.
But something that the government wants to mandate to human beings that we have not voted for.
I am here as a spokesman for the Tony Blair Institute, an independent research think tank. We've published all of the work on this in the public. All of this has happened in the public eye, so people know what our position is. We have advocated for this with the previous government. We will advocate for this where this is relevant. But let me tell you, by the way, you've said this is going to be compulsory. That is not the case. So what the government has been quite clear on, it is not going to be a compulsory digital ID. What they have said, and this was published on the Gov.uk website, you can go and see this now, it was produced in response to the petition as well, is that the digital ID itself will be voluntary. Anyone who is in the country legally as a citizen or as a legal migrant can have a digital ID. It's not going to require the use of a smartphone. No one's going to force us to install apps on our smartphones. There is going to be one particular task for which the digital ID system will be used in order to remove loopholes that currently do exist around the right to work check. But that is not the same as forcing everyone to have a digital ID.
If you have to have a digital ID in order to work, that is mandatory.
You have to prove that you have the right to work. It needs to be verified by the government, which the digital ID system...
But we have that already. We have that already.
What we have today is we have the previous government arguably abrogating its responsibility and saying, we're not going to do any of the checks. We're going to tell you, the small business owner, to take on an additional burden of carrying out this check. And if you get it wrong, you are the one we're going to go after. And the system that we're talking about here is one where instead of having all sorts of different documents, all sorts of misconceptions around what does and doesn't count as right to work proof, we're going to have one simple system where the government has a record of your right to work, as it should, as it does today, because that's the only way that you can actually prove this today. And it's going to set up a system that allows you as a business owner, you as a landlord, to quickly check against that government information whether the person you're dealing with has the right to work.
It won't stop illegal working, though, because at the moment an employer should know whether that person who's working for them in that pub or that car wash or that nail bar, they should know, they should be able to verify that they have a right to work and they're not doing it. This will make No difference. They aren't going to suddenly have a moral and ethical light bulb go on in their head and decide, oh, I must do the decent thing. They're not failing to verify somebody's right to work because it's inconvenient or it takes too long. They're not doing it because they don't care, and they still won't
Some
care.
employers.
Whilst everyone else, innocent people like us who are working freely and paying our taxes, we will be tied to a system which is meant to protect people from that, and that won't change.
Some employers genuinely do not do the checks because at the moment there isn't a good system for them to do those checks. There is data that shows that up to a third of employers think that having a national insurance number is sufficient proof of right to work. That is not the case. And we can make lives easier for them and reduce the burden on them. But on the point about stopping illegal working, it won't stop illegal working. And I know you've had previous guests on your shows that have also made this point. It's not going to stop illegal working. What it is going to do, it is going to do three things. It is going to send a strong signal to the organized criminal groups, international organized criminal groups that deal in human trafficking as well as the drug trade, as well as the retail trade, that the UK is not a soft touch when it comes to this issue. And because these are business...
You mean
the
Venezuelan... But it's hilarious that the Venezuelan drug gangs that Donald Trump is literally bombing out of the water at the moment, they aren't... The UK equivalent are not going to sit around and go, oh, you know what? Because of the Tony Blair Institute advising the government, we now have a digital ID. I'm not going to do my human trafficking anymore.
Here's what it's going to do. It's going to make it much harder for them to advertise to the vulnerable people that they exploit, to say that, oh, there's no problem, you can just go and no one's going to do any checks, which is what they do today. And they are businesses.
They won't do any checks.
What they do today is they go on TikTok, they go on WhatsApp, and they say, you give us your hard-earned cash, and we will get you across to Britain, and we're going to get you into Britain because no one is going to care that you're here. And at the moment, they can say that. And at the moment, they can say that because we do not do these checks well. When we have these checks in place that are being done better, that reduces the scope for them to do this. Because, for example, they can no longer say, hey, cross the channel, we're going to give you a paper passport, which is what they do. We're going to give you a paper passport. At the moment, a paper passport is sufficient proof of right to work, even if it's a fake one. And employers don't know a fake one from a non-fake one. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that it is going to, by reducing those loopholes, create a much more consistent system where people who are here legally get a quick, convenient service. People who are here illegally will not have the same freedom. And the third, also important element, is that it improves enforcement. You might have seen the news item on BBC lately. They've run actually like a surprisingly detailed investigation of some of those gangs where they set up false businesses. Okay. And one of the things that Digital ID does allow you to do is it allows you to understand the patterns in the behavior of people who are found to employ people illegally. Because the data system allows you to carry out this type of intelligence-led assessment, which means that instead of just targeting random shops at random, you are going to be able to pinpoint with much greater accuracy where there is suspicious activity, and therefore enforcement is already improving, but enforcement can be much more targeted, can be better. By itself, it's not going to solve the whole problem. But what it does is it creates better conditions for the state to tackle this very serious issue.
Innocent people like me will be tied to a system because of criminals. That's why you're not going to convince the British public that this is fair, because we see the illegal migration issue. We want that fixed, but we don't want the cost of that to be a curtailing of our civil liberties, our privacy, and our detachment from the government. That is what worries people. And you'll never sell it to the public under the auspices that it will solve a criminal problem, because we're not the criminals. We're British people who don't want to live in a papers, please society. So you have to sell it to me in a way. I am yet to be convinced this has any benefits for me beyond not having to look around for paperwork. And frankly, that's a price I'm prepared to pay. Let me talk about the privacy issue, Alex, because there is no doubt that this very sort of innocent sounding digital ID, as though it's a card in your back pocket, comes with it the potential for extraordinary surveillance, because it won't be in isolation to a greater surveillance state that we're living in now. The tracking, the motorist is a good example. We've just heard in the last couple of days that Rachel Reeves is introducing or considering introducing pay per mile for your car. If you have an electric vehicle, I mean, you can't even write the twisted logic of that and how cruel that is for people who've invested in electric cars to do the right thing. Still being tracked relates to our digital ID, and what potential pitfalls are there for people in terms of the government watching, and what conditions might then be imposed upon the services that we can access via our digital ID.
I don't believe this is what's on the table. And honestly, if these types of limitations were being introduced to digital ID, you come back to the US, we can protest in front of number 10 together. The issue here is that digital ID can be designed, and I'm not saying this theoretically, I'm saying this because we know that there are countries in Europe, countries like Australia, countries big and small, that have designed digital ID systems that make surveillance much harder, that make transparency a default. Yes, much, much harder. Let me give you one example. In Estonia, I know that there are differences between us and Estonia, so consider this an example of the technical design of the system. In Estonia, there is a record of any government official accessing any piece of your personal data that you can see through your digital ID. And what that means is if you do have a bad apple, and they have had examples of this happen because some people do make mistakes. Someone looked up, why did an ambulance come to my neighbor's house? They were fired. You can't do this today. People can look up your information, we know this, and we accept those risks because we know that it's also the information that allows us to receive the services that we need to receive. But at the moment, I don't know a lot of the information that the government holds on me. With digital ID, I would know what they know. I would see what errors they might have made that mean that they are limiting my rights. So this can be much better for my rights. And from a privacy advocacy point of view, if I were a campaigner for something like Big Brother Watch, I would advocate for digital ID because it would give me more transparency. It would give me more visibility, and it would mean that there's real accountability for what government does with my data.
That sounds very time consuming for a project which is meant to save us time in our day.
How do you mean?
If you're having to look at who has been looking at your data, and you're having to go and proactively research who in the government has been looking
no, you don't have
at
to
your private
proactively research anything, as opposed to a Freedom of Information Act request that you'd send in today, which is very time consuming for everyone involved. In your digital ID, you would see just as a stream of information, oh, this person looked at my data. This is the reason. That's not a good reason. I need to say something.
I was surveilled by the government during the pandemic because I was very clear that the science behind the vaccine was flawed beyond belief. And I was on that watch list, Alex, because I was counter to what we were all supposed to be. What guarantees can you give me that my digital ID not be curtailed by the government should I speak out against them in the future? Of whether is Labour, Reform, Conservative, whatever, anybody could say something against the government, and they have access to prevent me from using service. Something that I had said. The potential is there for that.
The best guarantee I can give you, in my capacity certainly, is to advocate myself, and I'm doing this today, I'm doing this publicly as well, and for you to advocate, to build a system that doesn't let that happen, to build a system with the best practice international design that means that this type of information is not linked to your digital ID, and to advocate for legal protections for your rights. But this is not a digital ID issue. This is a civil rights issue. This is a freedom of speech issue. And these are issues that we should, as a country, be debating nonstop because they are important to our freedoms. But it is not a digital ID issue.
But you can see how it lays the framework. Once this framework is in place, the access, the ease with what, I tell you who it gets easier for, not the public. It gets easier for the government to stop us from doing things which we should be able to freely do in a free, Western, liberal democracy.
We are a free, Western, liberal democracy, as are many countries that have digital IDs. So if you look at the list of countries, it's 80 countries around the world, by the way, that have digital IDs of the kind that we are talking about here. 50 of them are high-income countries. It's pretty much all of Europe. And if you look at some of the most democratic countries with some of the best protections for civil rights in the world, whether that is Denmark, whether that is, in fact, Estonia, that has risen quite significantly in various assessments of civil liberties since they have introduced digital ID, there is no correlation whatsoever between a country that has a digital ID and a country that is curtailing freedoms in this way.
Who's your least favourite politician in the world today or in history?
I don't really have an answer off the top of my head, sorry. But tell me yours if you want to walk through that scenario.
The thing is, people, probably Tony Blair today. And I used to think he was fantastic. I even went and had dinner in Chequers with him once. I really genuinely used to think he was altruistic. I thought his intentions were good. But I've seen so much that I find incredibly worrying now. And it was crystallized in 2021 with the vaccine passports. Because the idea that a government should tell you you need to take a drug into your body that you don't want in order to go and access a restaurant is genuinely a dystopian. It is the stuff of nightmares. And so from that moment onwards, he very much lost me. And the Tony Blair Institute lost a huge swathe of the British public's support on that particular day when we had 18-year-old sons and daughters who were being told that it was going to be Freedom Day and they could go to a nightclub by Boris Johnson, and all these kids who'd been locked up could suddenly go and have freedom again. And it was the same time that they were told that they were going to have a vaccine passport, where we knew that myocarditis in young men was such a problem after the mRNA injections.
I think, Bev, we've already covered the vaccine issue.
It's my friend. Yeah, but the trust has gone. And that's the problem. And it might have been that this could have been passed through the British public if we didn't have that chilling memory. Because if it isn't a vaccine from Tony Blair or whoever is the politician, it could be a drug because you've been to the doctor with a mental health problem. It could be that you have a heart condition and you're not going to get your insurance unless you take this drug, and your digital ID will know that and it will stop you accessing services or work.
You know what, Beth? I agree with you that there is a real issue. There is a real problem with trust in government at the moment. We know this from all kinds of sources. And we know that it's because the status quo isn't working. We know that only 23% of Britons, when we asked them earlier this year whether they think they'll be better off in the next few years, said they think they'll be better off. That's down from 28% last year at the same time. People are feeling real decline. People are feeling that the status quo is not working. We also know that far more people think that we need bold solutions to these problems, not just incremental improvements. And digital ID, if we do it well, is a part of the solution to our crumbling public services. It is a way to reimagine how the state delivers its purpose, delivers its services to us. And the thing that I find really difficult to accept in this debate, there are a lot of concerns that I am completely on board with. The thing that I find really difficult to accept is this idea that we go big on concerns and small on solutions. I think Britain is a country that can build the most private, the most secure, the most usable, the most convenient, the most inclusive digital ID in the world. We're not the ones crafting a new path here. We can learn from what the world has done. We have plenty of tech talent to do this well. And I think rather than have this debate about, what if Britain, what if this, what if that? No, let's build a system that we know works for Britain. Let's have a debate about what that system looks like. And let's make lives better because we had that open democratic debate and because we have actually therefore been able to find the right solution for our country and build something that delivers for the people, because people are sick of the government not delivering for them.
We're sick of the government delivering too much for us, being too involved in the minutiae of our lives. It's not the other way around. And the idea
is it the hole that hasn't been fixed? Is it the hospital waiting list that you're on for 18 months where the government is doing too much? I don't agree with that.
And there's absolutely no way that a digital ID is going to fill a pothole.
It's not going
to fix the things that are a problem. The problem with the NHS is not. I was going to say, the problem with the NHS is not that we don't have a digital ID. It's not that we have a digital ID. We don't have enough doctors, Alex. We don't have enough nurses. We don't have enough beds. We have too many people in our country that aren't paying into the system but are still taking away from it. None of those problems are going to be fixed by a digital ID. And the idea that you're saying, we shouldn't be preoccupied with the what ifs. What if is everything with digital ID. And that was why I asked you the question about who is your least favourite politician. Because I often say to people, in whose hands do you not want this power? Because that's what it is. It is power. This is precisely, it is power to the citizen if we build it the right way, which is precisely why we need to build it the right way. That is the debate we need to have. We need to have a debate about how do we want the state to become more responsive? How do we want the state to save money? Because this is a system that will save money on public services, because it does mean that there is less bureaucracy. It does mean that there is less delay. It does mean that people aren't getting sicker while they wait for the service to come to them. But most importantly, I agree with you that we need to have the debate. I agree with you and your viewers, I'm sure, that there are real practical concerns around how such a system would operate. The what if is not about not asking the questions. It's about letting the questions stop us from doing something that is categorically better for the country. But we haven't had that debate and nobody voted for this. There is no mandate for Keir Starmer to introduce this. And he stood on a lectern and basically said it's mandatory. If you want to work, you're going to have it. Though we haven't had those debates. Some of us were like screaming into the ether for the last 5 years to have this debate, and we couldn't even mention it on the media. We'd be cancelled, we'd be censored if you started to talk about digital ID. You'd be written off as a conspiracy theorist because this is never going to happen. And now we're here, and you haven't taken the public along with you on that journey.
People voted for change. People voted for services to be improved, for economy to grow. But
they voted for change because the Conservatives were shite. They didn't vote for change because they wanted a bigger government to control their lives. The Tories were diabolical. That's why they voted for change. We're not talking about government
controlling your lives. We are talking about building a system that can allow you to exercise a lot more control over your interactions with government. That is what I would advocate for. That is what I would advocate for. And I know from experience, I know from global best practice that is entirely possible. And I think the debate that we do need to have is, how do we build this? How do we do this now?
Then why, when Keir Starmer stood up on that lectern and announced that we were going to have digital ID, why did he not express any concerns? Why did he not allay our fears by saying, I share your concerns about civil liberties and privacy and social credit score. I share those worries. He didn't. He basically said, you're going to have it. It's going to cure illegal migration. It was, first of all, they mooted it as the Brit card. That made no sense. So everybody saw through that. It was never going to stop the boats. It's like this government have tried to lie to us in all sorts of different ways to try and convince the public that this is something that we need. And you're not winning.
I can't speak for the government. I can't speak for Keir Starmer or his speechwriters. But I can say that I know from research we've done, I know from the experience of other countries, big and small, countries that are democratic, countries that have very similar political and cultural backgrounds to us, like Australia, that this is a system that when you look at what it actually does, and when you look at the ways in which it can improve our lives, is something that we are long overdue to have in this country.
Has the Tony Blair Institute, for instance, invited in Big Brother Watch to sit around the table with you and to debate these issues and to come up with solutions?
Yes, we've met with them. We have debated this at length with them. We have also debated this at length with them on programs like yours and out in the media. And we will continue to engage with them, with other civil liberties organizations. Consider this, from me here, an invitation for them to reach out to me to have these conversations and debates with us.
Who's going to make money out of it, Alex? Because there have been rumours in the press that Tony Blair's son is somehow involved via a technology company, that he would profit from this, and that Tony Blair himself would profit from this. How true is that? And if it isn't them, who?
That is completely untrue. I'm sure you know by now that the story about his son's company being involved in any way was a hoax, a myth, and the BBC airing it was quite an embarrassing moment, if you ask me. Similarly,
they get a lot of stuff wrong.
Sorry?
They get a lot of stuff wrong, the BBC.
Well, that one came close to home, right? But look, the government have said that they want to build this in-house as much as they can, because we know that occasionally outsourcing these types of IT projects outside of government has led to less than good outcomes. Let's put it this way. This is also what we have advocated for, because this is an important project. You need to get it right. So you need to make sure that you have the right expertise within government to build it and get the best tech experts on it.
But even if it's being done in-house, as you say, which makes it sound like some sort of charitable enterprise, there will be companies employed that will profit massively from rolling out this huge technology.
I really can't say what the government's procurement plans would be or might be, but as I say, in our view, this is an important system. We know that there are examples of teams within government that have been able to build really impressive digital products in the past, and we think we should learn from what they've done and do it again with Digital ID.
Does it mean you'd never be able to leave the house without your phone in your pocket?
Of course not. And the government has said so, by the way. The government has said it's not going to be something that has to be on a smartphone. They recognize that while the vast, vast majority of us have a smartphone, that the vast, vast majority of us have internet connectivity, there will be people who either don't, or people who might not want to use smartphones. And that's what the government has said. They will look at, again, international experience, where we know that it is possible to build a digital ID system that doesn't require a smartphone. And just as you can't be asked for an ID out in the street today in Britain, you will not be asked for your digital ID. That is also what the government has said. Nothing has changed from that perspective.
You won't be asked for a digital, but again, we say this now, but obviously we were told in the pandemic, you don't have to have this injection if you don't want it. And then it was, well, you're going to need it to get on an airplane and go on holiday. And then, well, you're going to need it to go out to have a restaurant. It's the creep, the mission creep is inevitable, because governments don't like less control,
we're
more
comparing
control.
apples. We're comparing apples and oranges here. We're comparing a once in 100 years pandemic with a system that 80 countries use today and do nothing of the sort that you're describing with those systems.
But Tony Blair himself said we need to have this technology to see, for instance, in the future, he said, who has been vaccinated and who hasn't. It is nothing to do with him or any other global leader, what an individual chooses to put in their body. That was used by Tony Blair as a justification for Digital ID.
Bev, again, I think these are very, very different subjects. Digital ID is a system that allows you to prove your identity the way that you have to do on a day-to-day basis already, that allows you to prove things about yourself in a way that today we do in very inconvenient ways, and that allows you to access services, again, the way that you would apply for them today based on those two things. It's not at all the same thing.
I think that also the public are very suspicious that this has happened in lockstep across the world. That it isn't just one country that's doing this, it's or every country is having the same conversation. And the idea of a sort of centralized control system is chilling to human beings, regardless of what country you live in. And you can say Estonia might have worked well, that there are concerns, obviously, about civil liberties and data protection in Estonia. But look at China, for instance, where a digital ID is tied to your social credit score. Have you behaved properly? Have you done what the government wants you to do today? Down to the minutiae. If you paid a parking ticket, you haven't paid a parking ticket, I'm so sorry, your bank account isn't going to work today and you can't go to the shop. This is possible, Alex, once we have a digital...
China. We are a democratic country that has elections. We elect a parliament that votes on laws, then has a public debate about what laws to pass. We are a very, very different country with a very, very different political system, with very, very different views across the public on the importance of civil liberties, on the importance of privacy, on the importance of democracy. And I see absolutely no reason that common sense Britons would suddenly change their view and go down that path.
But China didn't used to have a social credit system either. And it was only the
China's been communist for a very, very long time now and has been a totalitarian state for a very, very long time now. And Britain is not a totalitarian state.
Yet, Britain became a totalitarian state for a short period of time from 2020 to 2022. Under a conservative government, we became very close to a totalitarian state. And you would say, of course, it is different. And of course, there are differences. And you would say that is hyperbolic. And of course, it is hyperbolic. But we have to use our imagination.
I can walk out of the building that I'm in and go down the street and no one can check my ID. And there's absolutely no suggestion anywhere from government that that is going to change. And I think if we ever got to a point where another government came in and said, oh, we are going to start checking people's IDs out in the street for some kind of made-up reason, I'd be against this and you'd be against this, and we'd be on the same side of that debate.
But there will be bouncers who don't understand that. There will be people in security positions who don't get that. And they will be asking teenagers for their digital ID at the door to go into Wetherspoons. And there's going to be fights.
What are they doing
there will be
today,
violence.
What are they doing today? They're asking for ID. By the way, some of that ID is digital because we do have apps that you can have a recognized digital ID in that are provided on the App Store, and many bars recognize them. But it's no different in that sense from the world we live in today. You have to prove your identity. You have to prove certain things about yourself from time to time. And digital ID can make that more private and more secure because you're no longer sharing all of this information. You know, we've already discussed this at some length, but you're no longer sharing information.
Just, I know I've taken up a lot of your time and I appreciate it enormously, but just give me, use your imagination, but let's do the what if. That your digital ID is tied to your health status, which people get very excited about who are proponents of digital ID because it means that you can streamline the NHS or whatever the logic is. Your health status, any private medical conditions you might have, any private mental health conditions you might have, to your income, to your social media posts, etc. At the moment, that doesn't exist. That one file on each individual person doesn't exist. So when people say, oh, well, you give the government all your data anyway. No, we don't. Not in the same way. Not your private commercial transactions and your government.
You're not doing that with
records.
digital ID. You're not doing that with digital ID either. And in fact,
yet.
It's hard for me. No.
Not
but again, once again, if this is the conversation, it's not inevitable. But I believe it's not inevitable because if someone tries to do that, we can say no. Because we are a democratic country where that is possible. So let's have this conversation about where the limits of this are. Let's recognize that because there are risks and concerns, we shouldn't just say, oh, no, can't possibly do the same thing that lots of other countries around the world seem to have cracked reasonably easily. Let's find the right solution for Britain. Let's find
should we have
a way to deliver.
So should we have a referendum on it, Alex?
I don't think referendums work out very well in most cases because we
What does
have
that
to
mean?
have because we have a system, a parliamentary democratic system, where we can have these types of debates much more effectively when we talk like this. And I think a referendum is something that the government has responded to. It has said, there is a way to deliver digital ID with public consultation. There is a way to deliver digital ID with a public debate around how we want the system to operate, what are the limits that we place on it, and we can do that through these existing mechanisms.
But something so fundamental should surely go to the public. Our MPs are all wedded to this idea, either because they don't understand it, or they're beholden to the Tony Blair Institute if they're Labour, or they're beholden to big tech giants if they're the Tories, or they're beholden to the idea it's going to save the planet if they're Greens. Unfortunately, the MPs are not like normal people. And this should go to a referendum to the British public, surely, to goodness, if it's going to be.
The government has responded on that question.
And said no.
Yes.
Why?
I'm not the government.
What do you
think? I do believe.
You know this topic better than anyone else. Why do they not want it to go to the public? Because they know the public would never buy into it. And therefore, they could never have the control that they are currently fantasizing about.
Again, I completely disagree with you on this control point. I think there is a way to create this system if we lean into the debate, if we lean into the discussion, if we actually have a proper discussion, not based on misconceptions, not based on myths, a proper discussion of what has worked around the world, what hasn't worked around the world, what can we learn from some mistakes that have been made, what does Britain need today? That is the debate that we can have. There will be a consultation process that allows people to do this. There will be lively debate in the media, just as you and I are having right now. And I think that is how democratic societies like Britain make these decisions.
How optimistic are you that this will actually be rolled out?
I really hope that we get the benefits from the system that Britain deserves. I think the government has made commitments to building a system. It has made commitments to building the system in the open through a consultation, through showing its workings. I really hope that we, as a society, are able to have this debate and get to a point where we build a genuinely functional system that we can be proud of.
And just briefly, at the moment, we've got these various different ways that this seems to be being introduced, and particularly via company directors signing up to one scheme and children being encouraged to sign up to different schemes. It's a mess in terms of the comms of this, isn't it? Like it is a mess in terms of when people are suspicious. It has been handled horribly.
I think we really need to make the case for why people would want to have a digital ID. And I think if we make that case well, people will recognize that it can make their lives better. I think that we need to have this debate in the right spaces where people look for their truths. And that means that the comms on this is really, really important as an open conversation that explains what this is, explains what this is not, and invites views on how it should work.
Does it need 100% of people to sign up to it for it to work?
I don't believe that digital ID, the kinds of benefits that I've described, are dependent on 100% uptake. Again, countries have varying degrees of uptake. I think there should be real choice. I think digital ID, in terms of the data infrastructure, the more secure and private data infrastructure that it can help us build, can be helpful to everyone, whether they have a smartphone or not, whether they sign up to the one login system that this will be built on top of or not. But there should be choice and there should be parity of experience. It's actually a really interesting, I think, really exciting opportunity to rethink how we serve the most vulnerable in our society so that they don't miss out on these opportunities, even if they don't have a smartphone, even if they don't want to sign up to a digital ID on their smartphone.
Could have talked to you for a lot longer, Alex, but I think we covered quite a lot of detail there.
I think we've been at this for an hour. I'm not sure how long you're going to air for.
And it's important, and it's so important. And I know that our viewers and listeners are going to be messaging me going, I can't believe you didn't ask him about data breaches. I can't believe you didn't ask him about what will happen if you don't want to have that. I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that I missed. But I enjoyed our conversation. I'm happy to listen to it. I'm still not seeing much more other than as a bit of convenience, perhaps a little bit of streamlining of certain services. It doesn't seem enough for the potential costs at the moment for me, but I massively appreciate your time, and I really appreciate you talking to GB News viewers, because as you know, we are very concerned about this topic. Alex from Tony Blair Institute, what a pleasure. Thank you. This was GB News Originals with me, Bev Turner. I'll see you next time.